But I think what Kenny's saying is that there's not like a Negri and Hart book on Lenin.
Or in Empire, they don't have a section where they make a big point about what was so wrong about Lenin and what he did or anything like that. And leave it alone.
And to their defense, right? I mean, who in this age and day is a Leninist, right? Everyone knows that Leninism is repudiated and terrible, and we should all avoid it, or we'll get Stalinism. Right. Except, of course, right, for me, and I guess Chris and Kenny, and theoretically, Badiou, Alain Badiou, and Zizek. And so I think a good way to think about it is it breaks down into two camps.
And that's in volleyball.
And that's in volleyball. Okay. But it breaks down into two camps. You have Negri and Hart, who embody historically the progression of the Italian autonomists, of Rosa Luxemburg, of Emma Goldman, although she's more anarchistic. But this sort of left communist, sorry, I should use the pejorative, left communist impulse. And then you have Alain Badiou, you have Zizek, who carry out this sort of Leninist or Maoist sort of tradition. And those are sort of the main two traditions in the left.
Yeah, they do it more by choosing Rosa Luxemburg. They talk about her. They don't talk about her.
Actually, there's another criticism that comes against Leninism, and it's from Michael Albert, who he developed Paracon, which is a sort of like post-capitalist, if we just all move to this direction where we have, his basic conception is that we need to get rid of division of labor, and we need to get rid of bosses, and basically have some sort of collective place where we do our labor, but it's not alienating because we have balanced job complexes and other things like this. It's a purely utopian project from a Marxist perspective. But what his main critique of Leninism is he sees not two classes, but he sees a third class. He sees a class of, there's still bourgeoisie and proletariat, right, owners and workers. But he sees like a third class in there, which is what he calls the coordinator class. He says, look, this coordinator classes are people like doctors and lawyers and basically anybody who uses any type of specialized skill to gain like a really nice position in capital, but also they have some sort of power to kind of fluctuate and progress people, like teachers in a university can pass and fail students. So they have power in their own right based on their social position. And what he basically argues is, look, Leninism, all it wants to do is take over the coordinator class and begin giving out orders and telling people what to do. And his whole project is, well, if we're not going to get a division of labor, it's the same as saying, well, why should we? He basically makes this thing. He's like, look, if I was going to stand up here and say what we need is a big sexist movement to oppress women, but also we need to fight for capital liberation, nobody would take me seriously. So when the Leninists go on the approach of, what we need to have is division of labor still, then why should we take the Leninists seriously? Which, to be fair, I don't think Lenin ever makes that claim that we should keep division of labor. As far as socialism, yeah, I mean, it's a transitory stage. What most people don't ever realize is that all Marxist-Leninism is a stepping stone to get to socialism, which can then go to communism. So it's a strategy.
I'm curious, I remember from the introduction to that book, the compilation with all the different works of Lenin that you guys recommended, the fellow who wrote the introduction, he says that towards the end of his life, Lenin kind of looked back and regretted how things turned out to some degree. And because the introduction was pretty short, and I don't know that much about Lenin's life, I didn't know like exactly what he was referring to. But it seemed, and again, correct me, that maybe that regret that Lenin had at the end of his life about how things turned out had somewhat to do with how authoritarian things have become. Because one thing I noticed about What Is to Be Done is that he talks a lot about having to do things in secret, about having things very centralized, which is quite reasonable. Like you said, if you're living under a police state, you can't, he mentions, you can't have tons of newspapers where people don't really know what they're doing. They're out passing out, these revolutionary newspapers, and the police can easily get your subscription list and go and arrest everybody that is on the list. So there's some really pragmatic reasons why in living under a police state, if you're trying to organize a revolution, you need to do things in a pretty secretive, centralized, and maybe authoritarian way. But it just seems like that method of doing things continued and got worse under Stalin, etc. So was that something that Lenin kind of regretted, or did I kind of miss that wrong?
There's two things to really respond on this, right? So for the Vanguard Party itself, Lenin advocates for a position that's called democratic centralism. And ostensibly the idea is that everybody gets to have a say in the policies that we're going to be forwarding. And once we take a vote on it and we decide, we're held to those, which is the centralism part, right? You're held accountable for your position or the things, the tasks that you're divvied out to. So if your task is to go to agitate for that day and you're going to agitate, then you're going to have problems with Vanguard. So it's sort of authoritarian in that respect. The second, the notion, right, Leninism leading to Stalinism, some of us will say Stalinism is nothing more than Marxist-Leninism in practice.
Sorry, say that again, that Stalinism
is nothing more than Marxist-Leninism in practice. This is to say, basically, Lenin's other work, which is recommended as State and Revolution, and in it he talks about what does the revolutionary state do. For a state for Lenin, it's simply used by one class to oppress another class. So in Tsarist Russia, the state is used to oppress all the workers and keep everything really crappy for everybody, while the Tsar obviously maintains his dynasty. In capitalism today, there's no, I mean, the state, when it makes laws, it doesn't make laws in favor of workers. It doesn't help them out, give them health insurance. It doesn't allow them to unionize. You have to actually appeal for these sort of laws, and they're pretty easily shot down. So the state itself, and what Lenin, the goal of the Vanguard Party seizing the state for the revolutionary purposes is to flip that relationship. So instead it's the workers suppressing out all of the bourgeoisie class and getting rid of all the workers and this sort of thing. So, follow up there.
But as I was reading that, especially, I mean, in a lot of ways, in what is to be done, Lenin sounded a little bit like an anarchist, at least in terms of his criticisms of the police beating people up and, you know, the different atrocities that the state apparatus commit against people.
Mm-hmm.
It's rather than just being worried about, you know, just can we, you know, raise our wage by $1 or whatever. And, but then again, it just seems like in the Soviet Union, again, my knowledge of the history isn't really all that great, but it seems like all those things that the Tsar did in terms of having a police state and having a lot of political oppression, it seems like that was recreated in the Soviet Union, where instead of the Tsar's police, you have the KGB or all these other things. So it just seems like if you do have that state, even though it's meant to be transitory and it would be gone, once there's kind of a bureaucratic class that does have a lot of power, how would they ever give that up? You know what I mean? Just like capitalists don't give up power and wealth voluntarily, why would this bureaucratic class that controls the state apparatus and has power and authority over people, why would they give that up voluntarily so that there would eventually not be a state moving on?
Well, there's two things to say. Oh, actually, there's several things. But, right, so the whole Stalinist era, lots of purges, lots of collectivization. Most of the purges that took place were against the bureaucratic class. People in the Central Committee oftentimes were routinely purged. And the reason is because it's a dictatorship of the proletariat. So when the people say, look, these bureaucrats, they're not doing anything productive for us. They're in fact hindering the revolution. We need to get rid of them. And so they get purged from the party. So, I mean, there's that. Greg, you want to?
Well, I think to deal with this, there's three things that need to be said about Lenin's regret. One is, I think Chris is exactly right. The state for Lenin, right, is for the suppression of one class by another. Well, here's the thing. If you have a proletarian state and you're suppressing the bourgeois, right, slowly but surely, right, you'll, in theory, have less and less bourgeois, right, which means that state repression will eventually grow less and less and less. This is what's known in a technical term by Leninism as withering of the state. So this is what Lenin wanted. And in fact, part of the political bitterness of Lenin was that he didn't see the state withering. It's not so much that, you know, Lenin is sad that, oh, you know, I had a vanguard and it was really centralized, and then also we had the Red Army and we had to suppress, you know, a bunch of czarists and the White Army and the Black Hundreds and the Black Anarchist Army. What the problem was is he had a stroke. He was basically removed from political life where he could watch it, but he couldn't affect it. And so, especially, I would really recommend reading Lenin's Testament, right? Like, here we have Last Will and Testament, but of course, right, it's just a testament there because you don't have a will, you're not a political actor. But in any case, right, he leaves this testament, and what he advocates is for massive expansion of the CC, a massive shakeup of the Central Committee, which is the main legislative body. He calls for a massive expansion of that, massive inclusion of especially working class people into the CC, and a lessening of the power of what you would call the bureaucratic class, right, the party officials.